Segregation continues to be a huge problem in the Deep South, and as a result, recently a U.S. U.S. district judge has ruled that a specific school district in Mississippi has to desegregate and combined 2 of its high schools and 2 of its middle schools. Now, the U.S. District Judge Debra M ruled Friday that the town of Cleveland must merge its 2 high schools and 2 middle schools. Brown ordered the district to merge East Side High, where all but 1 student is black, with Cleveland High, where 48% of students are white and 45% are black. Similarly, the district must merge D.M. Smith Middle School, where all but 2 students are black, with Margaret Green Junior High, where 41% of students are white and 54% are black. Now, it's really interesting because as this case was brought to the judge's attention, of course, there was testimony on both sides, those who were advocating for desegregating these schools, and then those who think that the system should just stay the way it is. Those who are testifying that the system should stay the way it is argued that, hey, if we desegregate, well, then we're going to have less white students enrolling into these schools. They're going to enroll into private schools instead. The judge said there wasn't enough evidence presented to prove that that would be the case, although I would argue that it wouldn't be surprising if these students were enrolled in private schools.
But it is a case to make for keeping things as they are. Look, we shouldn't desegregate the schools because if you claim that there's racism that is keeping the black students, some exclusively in one school, well, we'll prove that to you by saying that the white students are so racist that if you put them together with black students, they would immediately go to a private school.
I mean, it's incredible that they want to keep the schools segregated so badly that they'll completely confess that these people are racist and they don't want their children going to the same schools as these black students.
So now I know what the right wing is going to say. Right now they're screaming into their computers, their smartphones, etc., which is, well, that's not racist. They just want to go to a good school. Okay, hold. Like, I get it, man. So there are plenty of places where a lot of people go to private schools because they're worried about the shape that the public schools are in. And that doesn't mean that they're racist. But number one, we're not talking about all those places. We're talking about a place where they've proven segregation, where some schools are exclusively black, right, or almost exclusively black, right? And the court has ruled, yeah, no, they're segregating them. They're doing it on purpose, and that's not allowed. That's illegal, okay? That's point number one. Point number two is, what if you thought, hey, you know what? Maybe we should make the public schools really good, even if they're mainly serving blacks.
Oh my God, that's crazy. We don't want to do that. No, and look, understand that in a lot of different counties throughout the United States, not even necessarily in the South, although it is very prevalent in the South, you will have segregation by default because of socioeconomic status. So you'll have neighborhoods of white individuals who will send their students to their local school, right? And these are usually wealthier neighborhoods. And then you have disadvantaged neighborhoods that are predominantly minorities. And so by default, they end up going to those schools. And so what needs to happen is there needs to be a reflection on what's happening in these school districts, because aside from the separation of races that comes from this, there's also a lack of understanding that comes from this, right? Because if you're not in a school that has different cultures and different experiences, different backgrounds, you have a harder time growing up and understanding people other than those that are in your own bubble.
Yes. So, look, when I grew up in New Jersey, I went to a school, it was a public school, but in a suburb that was more upper middle class, okay? And we used to go play football with Perth Amboy, and that was more of a minority in a poorer area. And so we would raise funds to make sure that we could have lights in our stadium so we could play football on Friday night and feel really cool, right? And we go to Perth Amboy, and they would play on a dirt field. And then I'd talk to the kids, and then later on, as I tutored people throughout school, and then I moved to Philly and DC and New York and all these places, you find out, hey, it turns out the kids they don't even have enough books to take home to be able to study. Now, how in the world are they going to be able to study and pull themselves up by the bootstraps if they can't even take the books home? But in that discussion, if you said, hey, East Brunswick, where I grew up, why don't you share resources with other cities and counties, or even within your county in New Jersey, so that Perth Amboy could have books to take home, it would have been an outrage. And they would have said, no way, no way. We got to have the lights in our football field, but they can't even have books,
And look,
right? And so the reality is, that's why, sorry to finish the thought, Anna, that's why I now love Finland's school system. I was skeptical in the beginning. They don't allow any private schools. And part of the reason they do that is that they say, we're all in it together. And you know what happens when rich people's kids, and there it's not a racial issue, right? But it is a socioeconomic issue. When rich kids are going to the same school as poor kids, the rich parents make sure that those schools are fantastic. They're not going to let their kids go to bad schools. So that's the reality that we live in America, where the rich kids go to the private schools and then they leave everyone else to fend for themselves with incredibly little resources.
One thing that I also want to bring up is, even though in some cases socioeconomic status might play a role in the segregation you see, it's sometimes just straight racism in certain parts of the country. So in Wilcox, Georgia, there was high schools that did not host their own proms. In fact, they allowed private proms to get hosted, and so they would do a white prom and a black prom. That's literally what they would call it, right? Parents would fund the proms, and it would just work out that way. In 2014, Wilcox County finally hosted a prom for its high school students, and it was an integrated prom. And the only reason why they did it is because the students fought for it. And they're like, hey, we're tired of having a white prom and a black prom. So this type of segregation still happens in the country. I mean, it's 2016. It's hard to believe that it's occurring, but it is.
This is not from the 1960s. This is not from the 1920s. It's from today. Look, remember where Sandra Bland got pulled over in Texas, and then she wound up dying in prison? In that city, they still don't let black people be buried in the same cemetery as white people. A judge had to make a ruling on it recently to say, hey, you know what? It's okay to bury black people next to white people. And they're like, ooh, that is radical. That's still happening today in America. So just because you're not racist or you haven't experienced racism, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because it most definitely exists.